That's how serious we are. It's about grassroots organizing to save our climate and our planet. Finally, Michelle, I just have to say something personal. You know, the president's talking about opening up ANWR for drilling, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. I got arrested with my rabbi and other cultural and civic leaders in Washington, D.C. in 2005, 15 years ago, when George W. Bush was talking about that nonsense. We've got to move away from taking every bit of fossil fuel we can out of the earth. Let's leave the earth be. Let's build up our soils. Let's transform our agriculture. Let's protect our wild places. We've got a beautiful future ahead of us if we seize it. I, for one, am ready to go. Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be with you. Such an honor to be part of this event. And I'm looking forward to night 2 of the convention. Night 1 was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congressman Levin. It's always good to hear about the good trouble that you've made in the past and that you are making now, and the strength of your commitment to workers and the climate going together is much needed as a voice. And yes, the news about the Arctic National Refuge and what the person in the White House wants to do to it is absolutely devastating. Thank you for being here with us today. Thanks. And I would now like to kick off our second panel. I'm going to introduce the moderator of the second panel, Jane Klebb, who is a friend and someone I have great admiration for. She's an experienced grassroots organizer, manager, political strategist, and nonprofit entrepreneur. Recently profiled by PBS in a film called Blue Wind on a Red Prairie. She really deeply understands the need to connect issues that rural and urban communities are facing to politics in order to win elections in Nebraska and in many other states like Nebraska. She started her term as the Nebraska Democratic Party chair in December 2016, but her activism and advocacy go back much further. In 2010, she founded the grassroots group Old Nebraska, leading farmers, ranchers, and Native allies in an effort to stop the Keystone XL pipeline. Her organizing style earned her the title Keystone Killer, which I love. Well, Nebraska expanded into a national alliance, and she also has a background with youth organizing earlier in her career as executive director of the Young Democrats of America. She has served in public office as both a commissioner for national and community service and a school board member, and she is the author of a terrific new book, which I have read with and was enlightened by, called Harvest the Vote: How Democrats Can Win Again in Rural America. Jane, I'm going to kick off this panel with an initial question for you, and thank you for moderating it. You are a dedicated activist, organizer, leader, and more. What is your observation about this moment we are in around climate and the opportunities in front of us in Nebraska, the Plains states, and rural areas?
Well, first of all, thank you, Chair, for inviting me and for creating this council. You had the courage and the bold move to take that next step that many other people had been talking about for years. And so thank you. I wanted to talk about two things, land justice and the frontline fighters. If we're going to solve climate change, we have to confront land justice. And the reality is African Americans used to own 15% of the farmland in our country over 100 years ago. So 100 years ago, they owned 15%. Today, it's less than 0.5%. That is not land justice. And when you look at Native Americans and the land that they have in their control that is being farmed and monitored by tribal individuals and tribal farmers and ranchers, that is essentially about 25% of the land that they own. So if we're going to confront climate change, we have to start making sure that land is back in the hands of those who are closest to it and that will take good care of it and is not in the hands of monopoly and corporate agriculture. So that's number one. Number two is we really need to start funding and start listening to the frontline fighters. So you know that I've spent the last decade organizing unlikely alliances of farmers, ranchers, and tribes and climate advocates all together. So folks in DC, as well as us in the Plain States, confronting pipelines. And if DC hadn't talked to us, if they only ran a campaign inside the halls of Congress, we would have lost Keystone XL. We won because those of us on the front lines, combined with those in DC, really amplified each other's voices and supported each other to make sure that we were running a winning campaign. We now need to do that for clean energy. One of the concerns that I have is that we're going to go gangbusters on clean energy, which we need to do, without taking into account the land and the people who live there, whose lives will be disrupted in so many levels on having to create this new clean energy infrastructure.
Those are just
whether it's transmission lines or whether it's wind or whether it's solar, we can't make the same mistake big oil did 50 years ago or 100 years ago when they were creating that energy infrastructure. We need to make sure that farmers, ranchers, union workers, and climate advocates, along with the big clean energy corporations, are all at the table together building out that clean energy future. If we don't do that, we're going to end up in a situation where folks' land is being taken advantage of, and they're not profiting at the same ways that big corporations are on the clean energy revolution. I know that as Democrats, we can lead the way, which is why it's so important to have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in the White House. So I think I'm going to kick it right off into our panel. And so, Chair, I just want to make sure I see Keith Ellison is on. I just want to make sure that Jay Inslee's on too, where I can start with Keith.
Start talking now.
I was trying to check in with. Is Governor Inslee on?
I'm on.
Okay, great.
I'm ready.
All right. I'm going to do your introduction first.
Okay.
Hold on a second, Representative Attorney General Ellison. You're going to come next. First, let me do a quick introduction to the climate governor, which is what he will always be known as, Jay Inslee, who ran a great campaign for president and inserted climate change into that campaign, which quite frankly, I don't think if he had not entered the race, we would not have the type of climate plans that were lifted up and are now being championed by Joe Biden. As the two-term governor of Washington, Governor Inslee has firmly established the state as a national leader in fighting climate change. He has set the state on a path to a carbon-neutral electric grid by 2030, and for that grid to be powered with 100% clean energy by 2045. He created the Clean Energy Fund, which is a model for economic development aligned with climate change goals, while creating clean energy, good-paying jobs across the state. Jay and his wife, Trudy, have raised their 3 sons and are now very proud grandparents of 4 little Inslees. Before I kick off a question to you, Governor Inslee, I also want to say that your chair is one of the rock stars in the State Party Association, Chair Tina Padalowski. We love her dearly. She's a good friend, so you're in good hands winning up and down the ticket with her in your state. But under your leadership, since 2013, the state of Washington has become a pioneer in transitioning to clean energy economy. And there's so many success stories in Washington, which clearly we could take up a whole hour just talking about that. But I think what we really want to know is, how can the federal government and the state government be working hand in hand to solve climate change? And what do you think are some of the most significant successes that you helped deploy in Washington to solve climate change?
Well, thanks for asking. But before I answer that question, let me ask one. What do we do when it's 130 degrees in Death Valley, hottest temperature in 107 years on the planet Earth? It's 125 degrees in Baghdad, and it's 100 degrees in northern Siberia. We elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I am so appreciative of your leadership, Jane, and everybody. To be on a panel with Keith Ellison is a joy. Peggy Shepard, who's won the Rachel Carson Award. I love being on this team. I want to say that. And I want everybody who's listening to this to be on this team. So I hope everybody who's out there right now, if you can show you're a climate voter for Joe, and by please texting climate to 30330, climate to 30330. Thank you. Please join this. We've got to make this happen. Well, you know, I wasn't prepared for you to ask me that question. Before I answer it, can I tell you why I'm so excited about the Biden-Harris ticket? Then I'll answer the question. Look, this thing is a plan that is perfect for the moment. I cannot tell you how thrilled I am what Joe Biden has come up with on his energy plans. And I'll just tell you, there's three things they've done that are very similar to what we've done in our state, but on a more massive national scale. Number one, the scale of their plan of $2 trillion is both enormous and adequate. And the fact that they're thinking in these terms with the scale of this is just thrilling to me. And I'll tell you what, these are going to be good union paying jobs, right? These are not just physicists and rocket scientists. These are electricians and carpenters and steel workers and sheet metal workers and iron workers. Nothing can be more exciting to me than people going to work in a good union paying job at huge scale. Number two, what the president has put forward, or the vice president has put forward, is a standard-based plan, and that's what we've done in my state. We have come up with standards that are actually enforceable. These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are legally enforceable standards to have 100% clean electrical grid by 2030. We have a similar, even not as ambitious as that requirement in our state for a clean electrical grid. These are things that can be enforced in court. They can be enforced in a regulatory system, and that is meat on the bone. And I'm just thrilled to see him adopt this standards-based approach. Third, what he has done, again, mirroring what we've done in our state, which is to make sure that we are growing equity and we are attacking racial injustice at the same time we're attacking climate change. And he has imbued his entire plan. Every time he's picked up a tool against climate change, he's picked up a tool against social inequality and racial inequality at the same time. He's guaranteed that 40% of the infrastructure goes to communities of color and poverty. We have a similar sort of targeting. He's making sure that union jobs are preferred. We've done the same thing in our state, where we basically insist on project labor agreements so that unions have an opportunity to do good work for working people. And he's imbued a system of economic justice throughout this plan. So what I would say is the kind of things that we have done in our state successfully are the kind of things I think we're going to do nationally under his leadership. And I'm just so appreciative of it. I could not be, there's only, one thing that could be more perfect. I guess I could be in the White House. I'm not going to be in the White House. But I tell you what, we're going to have a great champion, and that is Joe Biden. And I'm just tickled pink, and I can stay home and take care of my grandchildren. So that's good news all the way around. Closing comment, really serious about this. We need your help. Text us with your intentions to join this team to climate to 30330. Help us out. Let's go elect Joe and Kamala.
Thank you, Governor. And stick around because we're going to do a panel. So I have a question for Keith and then a question for Peggy, and then we're going to do a little panel with questions back and forth with you guys. So up next is Keith Ellison, Attorney General Keith Ellison. Formerly Representative Keith Ellison ran for DNC chair, came so close with a lot of progressive backing. He is a fellow board member of Our Revolution, so we get to serve together on Our Revolution. He's cut from the cloth of Senator Wellstone, one that is guided by generosity, inclusion, respect, and grassroots activism. In Congress, his many legislative accomplishments included passing progressive provisions to protect credit card holders from abusive practices and to protect the rights of renters. He also served as the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which made sure that he handed that off to over 100 members as he was co-chair. And I'll say that he was a progressive long before the cool kids started to be called progressives. And so he paved the way there as well. Before being elected to Congress, Attorney General Keith Ellison served 4 years in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and he was also a lawyer focusing on civil rights. He was the first African-American and the first Muslim-American to be elected statewide in the great state of Minnesota, which also has a great party chair, Ken Martin, who we all love. So it is my absolute honor to bring in Keith Ellison to talk a little bit about what attorney generals can do. So Attorney General Ellison, you know that there are now a new entire crop and field of progressive attorney generals all across the country that are really working hand in hand and are forming a network together in order to help solve some climate change issues. I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about some of the major environmental and climate harms that are happening in Minnesota and how your role as Attorney General is going to help solve some of those.
Well, thanks so much, Jane. It's always a pleasure to be with you and to discuss this critical issue that truly is, I think, an existential threat to all of humanity, and really emphasize the urgency. So proud that the Biden-Harris team is prioritizing this issue. I think that this is the boldest presidential initiative on climate that we have seen yet today. And Jay is absolutely right. Jay's not just a pretty good governor, and I'd say excellent governor. He's actually a pretty good writer. Jay, remember that book you wrote about climate, man? He's been on this for so many years. And I think that I'm so grateful, Jay, we're friends, and that you are still an activist, though you're there in the State House. Let me answer your question. One of the great state attorney generals is actually from Jay's state, Washington. Bob Ferguson and I just filed a lawsuit today to stop President Trump from trying to manipulate the United States Postal Service to try to get an advantage in the election. So state attorney generals, I believe, are an underutilized resource. And several of us, including Maura Healey in Massachusetts, Tish James in New York, in Peter Marone in Rhode Island, we have filed lawsuits challenging the basic concept of climate change and abuse. But in Minnesota, we've taken a slightly different tack. Even though we are targeting the issue of climate chaos, we're using the consumer laws to get at it by showing that ExxonMobil, Koch brothers, Koch Industries, and the American Petroleum Institute lied to consumers about the effect of climate change. Let me just show, I got a slide for you. Can we get that first slide up? Show everybody that slide. Is that possible? Uh-oh. Are y'all gonna really make me do this? I can't get the slide up. Anyway, let me read this to you because that slide is right there. Somebody ought to be clicking a button, but it's not there. So let me just say, ExxonMobil we have an internal document from them, October 16th, 1979, in which they admit that their behavior is contributing to CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, which has increased since the beginning of industrialization caused by them, and that now is 15% greater than it was many years ago. And this increase in fossil fuel combustion will cause warming of the Earth's surface. The present trend of fossil fuel consumption will cause dramatic environmental effects before the year 2050. That's according to their internal document, which I was trying to show to your people. Let me show you another document which goes to show that they lied about it. Because even though they knew that in 1979, they had a public campaign, a PR campaign saying, doomsday is canceled. Doomsday is canceled again. They move on to say, who told you the Earth was warming? Chicken Little? So they liken people who are raising the issue of climate catastrophe, like all of us, like many, they likened us to Chicken Littles. And then the most serious problem with catastrophic global warming is it may not be true. So they knew it was true, but they lied and said that it may not be true, trying to fool the public. That, we believe, is false advertising. You can't do that in Minnesota. You cannot lie about the effects of your product, whether it's cigarettes, whether it's cars, whether it's financial products, or whether it's the effects of burning fossil fuels like petroleum. And attorneys general all over this country are picking up on a lot of different theories. We're going with consumer abuses, false advertising claims, and deceitful trade practices. Others are attacking them in terms of the investor accountability, and there are other ways to hold them accountable. But state attorney generals are using existing law to say, you have deceived the public, you have damaged our environment, and you're hurting people, and we're not going to sit around and let you do it. Yes, they're hurting Minnesota. Minnesota has suffered catastrophic climate change, whether you talk about native peoples who are growing wild rice and are having very deleterious effects to their growing season and their crop, or farmers in southern Minnesota growing corn or soybeans or whatever, or whether you're talking about communities of color who are experiencing heightened rates of asthma and other respiratory diseases, or you're talking about all Minnesotans. Do you know we had more mosquitoes this year than we normally have? And let me tell you, more mosquitoes in Minnesota is like more snow in Minnesota. We already got more than we're looking for, right? And so, yet they were tough out there in July, August. The people know it, and that is linked. It's proven and demonstrable and linked to global climate change, something that ExxonMobil, Koch Industries, and the American petroleum industry paid for and sponsored a lie campaign, and we're going to hold them accountable for it. That's what attorneys generals are doing. So that's what we want you to do. If you're out there and you're listening to this show, please engage your attorney general and say, what are you doing to address climate change? We know you can do things. Bob Ferguson is doing something. Ellison's doing something. Maura Healey's doing something. What's your attorney general doing? We can do a lot, and we're doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Ellison. As the people's lawyer, you brought the evidence to make the case, which I appreciate. You need to stick around too, because we're going to have some panel questions. I'm going to now introduce everybody to Peggy Shepard. If you're a climate advocate, you probably know her name. She's the executive director and co-founder of We Act for Environmental Justice. Peggy is also, she runs two different offices. She straddles between both Manhattan and Washington, D.C. She's been running successful grassroots campaigns since 1988, and she's become a national leader in advancing both environmental and climate justice issues. She's a graduate of Howard University. She received the 10th Annual Heinz Award for the Environment, and she won the Rachel Carson Award from Audubon. She has honorary doctorates from both Smith College and Lawrence University. Peggy also served on the Environmental Council of the DNC's Platform Committee. She played a key role in making sure that the DNC's Platform Committee actually had strong climate planks. And I will say from the 2016 to the 2020, it does. And that's because of the work that Peggy and Michelle and so many others worked on. Peggy, thank you for being part of this panel. We're going to bring in your perspective from being a both grassroots advocate and a policy expert. And so in this time of the pandemic, some long overdue attention is finally being given to environmental justice and systematic racism and how both of those issues work hand in hand. Could you please talk a little bit about those two critical issues, and how you think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will lift up our communities while solving climate change?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Michelle, for all your hard work on the platform. Well, tonight I'm here to speak for myself, and like many other individuals in this country, I'm experiencing a moment, one of expectation, buoyed by the spectacle of our firm and unrelenting demand for recognition, equity, and justice, and to end the poison of racism and injustice that has contaminated systemically all levels of our society and government and left communities in my city, left them behind with a legacy of pollution that has been fatal during this COVID pandemic to many of the 71% of African Americans living with air pollution and over 80% of Latinos in this country. And that's why we need the Biden-Harris team to address these issues. Now, I'm an African-American woman, an environmental justice activist for the past 32 years, who lives and works in Harlem and New York. I'm executive director and co-founder of a dynamic organization called We Act for Environmental Justice. It works to organize and empower community residents and members in uptown Manhattan neighborhoods through our federal policy in DC. And, you know, New York neighborhoods are like other communities and tribal areas in this country that are impacted by disproportionate and cumulative exposure to multiple contaminants in air, water, and soil. And these exposures put African Americans, people of color, and indigenous folks at higher risk of chronic illness and shortened life expectancy due to the increasing levels of environmental rollbacks by the current administration. Now, I understand why we need Joe Biden's plan. We need it to secure environmental justice and equitable economic opportunity, to center justice and equity in all policies. And, you know, we have a lot of concerns. What do we do about air toxics that are leading to thousands of premature deaths every year? Well, you know, communities have been calling for new monitoring in frontline and fence line communities. That's what Joe Biden's talking about. And there's a whole new legion of citizen scientists who are eager to assess environmental quality in their air and water. And Biden would do this. He would establish interagency teams to address targeted issues and partner directly with those affected communities. He would establish an interagency climate equity task force to help resolve the most challenging and persistent pockets of climate inequity in vulnerable communities and tribal nations in this country. Now, it's clear Biden wants to go back to decisions that are driven by data and science, as we all do. So he can create a data-driven climate and environmental justice screening tool. Now, this tool would identify communities threatened by the cumulative impacts of multiple stresses of climate change, economic and racial inequality, and environmental pollution, the kind that we find in most environmental justice areas, also known as sacrifice zones, places without the complexion for protection, as Dr. Bob Bullard would say. Now, I know that in flood-prone areas, folks are really eager to help Biden create his national crisis strategy to address climate disasters, and also the plan to prioritize equitable disaster risk reduction. And we need that before the next hurricane hits. Now, we know that divestment has killed so many communities. And so Biden's plan would commit 40% of climate and environmental investments to frontline and vulnerable communities. And as a proud New Yorker, I'm happy to say that this plan was influenced by the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that my organization and so many coalitions and allies in New York fought for over the past few years. And Biden would invest heavily in eliminating legacy pollution in communities of color, rural and low wealth areas. Legacy pollution that has to be resolved so we can move ahead. So, you know, I'm excited that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have listened to the analysis and the challenges expressed by environmental justice and climate activists. The Biden plan and the Harris Climate Equity Act are both committed to process that gives advocates a seat at the table by establishing new offices and senior White House advisors on climate and environmental justice. And, you know, the act also aims to center accountability and equity impacts in federal climate and environmental action. It's what we need. And, you know, for accountability, we need our advocates. Our environmental